Hello, welcome. In this second tutorial, I'm going to explain why Java is tagged as platform independent language. Since it has started its journey, Java is typically called a platform independent language, and you as a Java programmer must know why it is platform independent and how it is platform independent. This is the question that you're supposed to get in 9 out of 10 job interviews. Okay, so here's the explanation. In order to understand this, let us consider that you have written a C++ program for some purpose and you want to get that executed on your machine. Now a computer is assembly of hardware components, right? And we just do not interact with the hardware directly. We actually install operating system on the hardware and the operating system manages the hardware. And also our programs are executed by the operating system. We do not submit the program directly to the hardware. It is the operating system that executes our program using the hardware. That's why the operating system is called resource manager or hardware manager. Now, if you submit your C++ program that you have written directly to the operating system, then the operating system will not be able to execute that because it's only a text file, right, that is written there. None of the operating system under the sky is going to understand these instructions that you have written there in your program. And this is true for all the programming languages. So if you want to get your program executed by the operating system, you need to translate your code to the operating system understandable format. So you need a translator, and that is what we call a compiler. So we need a compiler that's going to compile our C++ program to the particular operating system format so that we can get our program executed on the operating system. Now, we have different kinds of operating system out there, right? You may use Windows, or someone may use Mac or Linux. Now, say you have the Windows system and you want to execute this C++ program on that Windows operating system. So what you need is a C++ compiler that can generate object code understandable for Windows. That means you need a C++ compiler for Windows operating system. And that is for Windows. Now, if you submit your code to this C++ compiler for Windows, it's going to generate object code or translated code that is acceptable for the Windows operating system. So here we get the object file containing the object code. And now if you submit this object file to the Windows operating system, obviously that is going to accept this and it will understand the instructions written there and it will be able to execute that. But if you want to execute this object file that is generated by the C++ compiler for Windows on Linux machine or Mac machine, that's not going to work. Okay, so in that case, if you want to execute your C++ program, this one on Mac or Linux, you need to compile that using C++ compiler for Mac. So if you want that to execute on Mac, then you need a C++ compiler for Mac. And that compiler is going to generate object code that is understandable by Mac. And you can take this object code and you can submit it to the Mac machine. So if there is another machine that is running with Mac, then obviously this particular program gets executed there. This particular object file will be acceptable here and that will be executed. Now same for Linux as well. If you want to get your C++ program executed on Linux or Unix system, then you need to have a compiler, C++ compiler for that particular platform, and you need to get your source code compiled according to that. So this is the way that the C++ programs gets executed on a particular operating system. You need to compile that for a particular operating system using a compiler. That's required. So that's why the C++ program is not platform independent. They are dependent on platform. They are dependent on the compiler by which you are compiling and creating the object file. If you're using Windows compiler, your object file is typically dependent on Windows. This object file that you have created for Windows is not going to work here on Mac or any other platform. So C++ is not a platform independent language. In contrary to that, if you look into Java, you can compile the Java program only once, and the compiled object file can be executed on any operating system. That's why Java is called platform independent language. Let me explain that as well. Say we have written a Java program there and we want to execute that Java program on different platform. So here what we need to do is to submit that Java program after writing to the Java compiler, and the Java compiler is going to generate object code, object file that is typically called a class file. Okay, and that has an extension of .class. Okay, so that's the class file. Now if you take that .class file to Windows system, yes, it's going to be acceptable there. If you take this .class file to Mac or Linux or Unix, everywhere it's going to be acceptable. So you can execute that on Windows, on Mac, or on Linux, on any machine running with any operating system. But there is a condition that you need to know. Now this is the thing that you must understand, how Java is platform independent. The Java is platform independent. Yes, it can be executed. The Java program can be executed on different platform by compiling only once. But how that is possible? There is a condition. If you take this .class file to any of these operating system, that will be executed only if that condition gets satisfied. And that is, you must have the Java runtime environment installed in this system. If you do not have that Java runtime environment installed in your system, then none of this system is going to accept that .class file and will be capable of executing that. So the condition must be fulfilled. You must have this JRE, the Java runtime environment, which is freely available in Oracle site, and you can download and install that. So when you have the JRE installed in your system, we say that your system is Java enabled. Okay. Now what is the purpose of that JRE? It accepts that .class file. Okay. It's not your operating system that's going to accept that .class file. It is the JRE that's going to accept that .class file. And it's having an interpreter within it. And it's going to interpret the lines of that .class file, and it's going to interpret them according to the underlying operating system. So if you are using a Windows system and you submitted that .class to this JRE of Windows, the interpreter within that will interpret each line of this .class file according to the Windows, and it will submit these statements to Windows so that Windows can execute them. And if you want to execute that .class file on Mac, so you submit it to the JRE of Mac, and the interpreter embedded within that JRE will interpret each statement of that .class file according to the Mac operating system. And the same for Linux or any other operating system. So the JRE is the key player there. Okay, it interprets the .class file according to the underlying operating system, and it is possible to execute the Java program on any operating system in this way. So that is how the Java is platform independent. It can be executed on different platform once you compile the source code, but that is not possible for C++ or C programming or COBOL programming. That is not possible for this kind of languages. If you want to execute your C++ program on different platforms, then you need to compile the source code of using the different compiler for those platforms. So that's the difference. Okay. So I hope you have understood how Java is platform independent. Now, that's all for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can download and install JDK. Now, what is JDK? JDK is a kit that contains the Java compiler, JRE, and all the other Java tools and library utilities that you may need while developing Java program. So what they did, earlier Sun Microsystem, now Oracle, they have put all these tools, library components together in a bundle, in a kit, and that we call Java Development Kit, and they have distributed, they distribute this kit freely. This kit is available freely on Oracle site, and I'll show you how to download that, how to install that on your machine. So in the next tutorial, I'll do that. Thank you for watching this.